This is VOA Africa.
Hello, I'm Esther Githui-Ewart. It's Friday, August 21st. This is Africa 54. Due to the global outbreak of COVID-19, Voice of America is taking every necessary precaution to safeguard its employees. So our broadcast will look a little different today and in the near future as we, out of an abundance of caution, reduce our staffing at VOA headquarters here in Washington. We're working to help keep you informed about what's going on, and we appreciate you staying with us on Africa 54. The number of confirmed COVID-19 cases in Africa now tops 1.1 million as the death toll climbed to almost 27,000, according to the Africa Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. But the Africa CDC says the continent is beginning to slowly bend the curve of coronavirus infections as measures like mask wearing and social distancing are slowing the spread of the disease. South Africa has the most COVID-19 cases at nearly 600,000, and the country also has the continent's highest number of deaths related to coronavirus at more than 12,000, according to Johns Hopkins University. Next is Egypt, with 97,000 infections and 5,200 deaths, followed by Nigeria with almost 51,000 cases and 992 deaths, according to Johns Hopkins University. Emma McCarthy reports.
The Africa Centre for Disease Control and Prevention said Thursday the continent is starting to slowly bend the curve of COVID-19 infections, thanks to measures like mask wearing and social distancing. Although the spread of the outbreak was slow in Africa in the early stages of the pandemic, the rate of infection gradually accelerated, especially in South Africa, which now accounts for more than half its caseload of more than 1.1 million. Although pressure is building in some countries to open up schools, the head of Africa CDC, John Hopkins, said that move should be delayed until infections have declined substantially. Africa's caseload has remained relatively low compared to other countries, a factor that has been attributed to its relative isolation. But some experts say low levels of testing in many countries also means infection rates are likely to be higher than reported.
Emma McCarthy of Reuters with that report. Ethiopia arrested thousands of protesters, opposition members and journalists during July's sectarian unrest. Health workers and local officials say some of those detained have contracted COVID-19 and are concerned the virus is spreading in overcrowded prisons and makeshift detention centers. Simon Marks has more from Ziwe, Ethiopia.
In the 4 months since Ethiopia recorded its first case of COVID-19, Dambal Kasim, the head nurse at a coronavirus treatment center in the Ethiopian town of Ziway, had very little to do. But in the aftermath of widespread unrest following the killing of Hachalu Hundessa, a popular singer who fought the cause of Ethiopia's Oromo ethnic group, that resulted in thousands of incarcerations and at least 178 deaths, things have become much busier. Dambal, health workers in the region and local officials say some detainees have tested positive for the coronavirus. Authorities are now testing inmates amid concerns the virus is spreading fast.
In the 3 months since COVID-19 began, we only had 2 cases of coronavirus, but in the last 2 weeks we've recorded 23 cases. In prisons, there are sometimes 150 people in one room following the unrest that resulted in many arrests. That is why people are being infected in jail.
Rights workers say Ethiopian authorities have detained scores of opposition members and journalists for prolonged periods without charge since Hachalu's death on June 28, resulting in overcrowded jails and makeshift detention centres located inside schools and warehouses. While the government has blamed the opposition Tigray People's Liberation Party for coordinating the killing and the violence that followed Hachalu's death, anti-government activists and Oromo opposition members believe the violence was pre-planned in order to create the conditions necessary to clamp down on dissent. Jibril Shabi, the CEO of the General Hospital in Ziway, spoke to VOA about the risk of COVID-19 spreading among detainees.
Following the arrests after Hachalu was killed, we're recording more cases. We have 3 female prisoners infected and sent to a nearby town. We suspect there are more, and we're conducting more tests.
Among those detained who have contracted COVID-19 is the Kenyan journalist Yasin Yuma. The Foreign Correspondents Association of East Africa has complained that he was held despite the court granting him bail and have appealed for his immediate release. On Thursday, he was sent to a government-run isolation centre. The Ethiopian Health Ministry did not respond to questions asking how many detainees had contracted COVID-19. Simon Marks for VOA News, Zuwai, Ethiopia.
Wet markets in Nigeria, a key hub for global trade in exotic animals and bush meat, are bustling, even though experts believe a similar one in China played a role in the outbreak of COVID-19. Angela Okumadu explains.
Just a few months after Nigeria's Ebe fish market was under lockdown, vendors at the Lagos site are back buying, selling and trading animals. Endangered pangolins, tortoises and snakes are among the wildlife sold here. Experts say COVID-19, which has killed around 1,000 people in Nigeria, jumped from animals to humans, possibly at a wet market in China. But few in Ebe are worried. Kunle Yusuf says he's been selling wildlife for 10 years.
Because of the coronavirus, it's not inside the meat.
But experts like University of Cambridge virologist Olivia Restif argued that there needs to be more education around hygiene and the safety of the wildlife trade.
We're very concerned with the risk that it poses. But when it comes to what should be done about it, we are very cautious because we are very aware that those markets, and in general, the trade of animals on meat products, are very important socially and economically and often culturally.
Chinedu Mobo is the founder of Greenfinger's Wildlife Conservation Initiative. He's at Ebe Market to give some animals a new lease of life by either bringing them to the sanctuary or releasing them back into the wild.
I believe they would appreciate them more, getting close to see them, coming up close to them to see them. I imagine going to parks, in other countries, and this is what people do.
After about an hour of haggling, he bought just one pangolin, giving it a second chance at Greenfingers.
Angela Okumadu of Reuters with that report. Nigeria is the world's third largest producer of ginger after India and China, and is seeing steady sales during the COVID-19 pandemic as consumers seek the health benefits of the spicy root. But Nigeria's ginger farmers who used outdated farming methods are struggling to benefit. Timothy Obiezu reports from Kaduna State.
This year, ginger farmer Shadrach Nyomo is planting corn alongside his ginger to make up for the huge losses he suffered over the last 2 years when ginger prices nosedived by up to 80%. But as consumers around the world seek the health benefits of ginger during the coronavirus pandemic, demand and prices are increasing. Now, Nyomo wishes he had planted more ginger.
To say I knew that ginger will increase the way it is now. I've planted more than 200 bases. As you can see, I planted 85 bases this year because of the loss that we suffer.
Nyomo is from Koi Town in southern Kaduna in northwest Nigeria. The region is known as the home of ginger. Many locals in this area are ginger farmers, and over 50% of Nigeria's total ginger output comes from here. But many ginger farmers use crude planting methods that affect their overhead costs. That's why, even though the price of a typical 40-kilogram bag of ginger has increased fourfold this year from $20 to around $83, farmers are not seeing much profit.
Farmers need some equipment, more equipment. Already government they try, but they need more equipment like a slicing machine, cutting machine, drying machine, that they will dry, killing their ginger, that Nigeria ginger will come very clean and pure for abroad.
Ginger processing here is mostly done manually. The only government-owned ginger processing plant in the area was last used nearly 2 decades ago. Authorities have promised to revive it, build new plants and train farmers on more profitable ways to produce ginger.
There is a lot of agri-extension workers that go around to educate the farmers from the grassroots on the farming, the mode of application of insecticides, even the fertilizer, and the mode of processing, and such that they will process their goods to have market value.
Ginger farmers like Shadrach Nyomo and Jamilu Jibril are hoping the government fulfills its promise to restore ginger processing. Meanwhile, they're grateful that ginger prices are much higher than they were last year. Timothy Obiezu for VOA News, Southern Kaduna, Northwest Nigeria.
South Africa's luxury game lodges are empty and safari vehicles gather dust with borders closed due to the coronavirus crisis. For Somkanda, a community-owned Big Five game reserve selling game meat has thrown it a lifeline. Julian Satterthwaite reports.
From the savannah to the plate. For Somkanda, a community-owned Big Five game reserve in South Africa, selling game meat has thrown it a lifeline as the continent's multi-billion-dollar safari industry unravels. The reserve normally gives away or sells at low cost the meat from impala and nyala, which it culls each year to manage stocks. But facing a loss of up to 90% of its revenue, it is now actively marketing the meat, often seen as a delicacy bought by restaurants and foreign tourists, to bring in between 50,000 and 100,000 rand per month. That's between about $2,875 and $5,730. Roeli Kloppers is chief executive at the Wildlands, which co-manages the reserve.
With the tourism and all of that income we've lost, we had to look for something else. There's always culling on the reserve, and basically all we've done is we said, instead of culling and then just giving that meat away or selling it at a very poor and low price locally, what we've done is to try and market it and put it into the commercial market.
Before the pandemic, local and international tourists would watch the Big Five on guided bushwalks and game drives. Fana Gumbi is the leader of the Mvokweni Community Trust, which owns the reserve. He says the extra funds are vital for the park's upkeep.
We had to look for other ways of boosting the income in the reserve so it can generate money to pay the bills for running it. We have electricity bills, water pumping, general maintenance and the paying of salaries. That's where we decided to use the culled animals that are breeding in numbers. That meat can be sold in the market so we can generate extra income to cover the expenses of running the reserve.
The African Union estimates that countries on the continent have lost almost $55 billion in travel and tourism revenues in just 3 months due to the COVID-19 pandemic.
Julian Satterthwaite with that report. We're excited to hear what you think about Africa 54 and the stories we cover. Join the discussion on Facebook. The address is Africa 54. We're also streaming our broadcast live on Facebook. Please watch and share our show with your friends. Also check out our headlines 24/7 on voaafrica.com. Still to come, a conversation with legendary Malian singer Oumou Sangare. We'll be right back.
Times change for political parties and the people who support them. Abraham Lincoln was the first U.S. president from the Republican Party. He led the country through the Civil War that preserved the Union and ended slavery. After the war, newly enfranchised African-American male voters supported the Republican Party, which was committed to civil rights for the recently emancipated. At the same time, the Democratic Party included white supremacists who opposed civil rights for black citizens. But during the 20th century, things began to change. Democrat Franklin D. Roosevelt, first elected in 1932, made his party more appealing to African Americans. FDR took measures to lead the country out of an economic depression. And while that was happening, civil rights became less important to many Republicans. African American support for FDR spiked in 1936, and support for Democratic presidential candidates has remained strong ever since. Another shift happened in the 1960s. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965 passed with support from both parties at the urging of Democratic President Lyndon B. Johnson. After those votes, white segregationist Democrats fled the party in large numbers, creating Republican majorities across the South. The modern political landscape is now almost a reverse image of the one that existed more than a century ago, with African Americans overwhelmingly supporting the Democrats and Republicans backed predominantly by whites.
Welcome back to Africa 54. In accepting the U.S. Democratic Party's nomination for president Thursday, Joe Biden set out to make President Donald Trump's handling of the coronavirus pandemic the central issue in the November election. VOA's Brian Padden reports on the conclusion of the virtual Democratic National Convention, which also strived to showcase party diversity and unity in opposition to Trump without physically gathering as a way to prevent the spread of COVID-19.
After officially becoming the Democratic Party's candidate for president, Joe Biden took the political fight to his Republican rival, President Donald Trump, focusing criticism on what he said is the president's inability to contain the coronavirus pandemic in the U.S.
Our current president has failed in his most basic duty to the nation. He's failed to protect us. He's failed to protect America. And my fellow Americans, that is unforgivable.
Throughout the four-day Democratic convention, with participants joining remotely to prevent the spread of the coronavirus, prominent speakers underscored the existential crises caused by the pandemic, which has taken the lives of more than 174,000 Americans and triggered a deep economic recession, putting 30 million people out of work. The pandemic, they said, also heightened racial inequality unrest in the country, as ethnic minorities have suffered higher death rates and job losses.
And this is not a coincidence. It is the effect of structural racism.
They denounced Trump as uncaring.
Nero fiddled while Rome burned. Trump golfs.
Incompetent.
Donald Trump hasn't grown into the job because he can't.
And incapable of providing effective leadership.
He simply cannot be who we need him to be for us. It is what it is.
In contrast, President Trump has tried to make the election about who is best able to rebuild the economy. The president, 74, has also attacked the 77-year-old Biden as a feeble frontman for socialists in the party intent on raising taxes and free trade globalists wanting to ship jobs overseas.
We're the wall between the American dream and total insanity and the destruction of the greatest country in the history of the world.
In his acceptance speech, Biden emphasized he would prioritize strong measures to mitigate the pandemic that are needed before business can get back to normal.
We will never get our economy back on track. We will never get our kids safely back in schools. We'll never have our lives back until we deal with this virus.
While the virtual Democratic convention also highlighted ethnic diversity and unity, analysts say this election will likely be a referendum on President Trump, and the coronavirus pandemic could be the deciding factor. Brian Padden, VOA News, Washington.
As the first woman of color on a major party's ticket, U.S. Democratic Vice Presidential nominee Kamala Harris is expected to galvanize the minority vote. But Harris also faces unique challenges and opportunities as she campaigns alongside presidential nominee Joe Biden. White House correspondent Patsy Widakuswara has this story from Wilmington, Delaware, where Harris delivered her acceptance speech.
A historic moment in U.S. history as Kamala Harris, the first American of Jamaican and Indian descent, accepts the Democratic Party's nomination to become Joe Biden's running mate.
We're all in this fight. You, me, and Joe. Together. What an awesome responsibility. What an awesome privilege.
Her call hits the right note with many Democratic voters.
I think a lot of young people across the country are actually applauding and feeling connected to her.
There have been 2 female vice presidential candidates before Harris, Democrat Geraldine Ferraro in 1984 and Republican Sarah Palin in 2008. Ferraro and Palin were selected to energize campaigns that were trailing in the polls, but Harris is joining Biden at a time when polls show him the front runner.
And so Biden is playing from real strengths and nonetheless saw fit not to shake up the race, but to kind of consolidate those advantages that he has by bringing on a woman and a woman of color. And that speaks, I think, volumes about the direction of the Democratic Party and where our country is going.
Women in American politics have long encountered additional challenges compared to their male peers, including being judged by their appearance or even their voice.
But the president's senior advisor, Jenna Ellis, just said Kamala Harris sounds like me.
And as a female candidate of color, Harris has faced extra scrutiny over her family background. Although Harris is an American citizen born in California, President Trump has not rejected false claims that Harris is ineligible because of her parents' immigration status. Ultimately, it's the voters who will decide what to believe.
As somebody with immigrant parents, I don't have to prove I'm American to somebody again and again and again and again. The racists are never going to believe you.
Harris, a former prosecutor, will play a key role in delivering the Democrats' most pointed attacks on the incumbent administration. Already, President Trump has called her mean and nasty, remarks some consider sexist. Still, Harris has a huge opportunity to be the future of her party. If elected, Biden will be 78 when he's inaugurated in January, making him the oldest person to ever assume the American presidency. Biden has spoken of himself as a transitional figure and has suggested he may not seek a second term. The Democratic National Convention showcased the racial and cultural diversity of their political coalition, as well as a generational gulf in the party, something that Biden is trying to address with his 55-year-old VP pick.
He's signaling his interest in handing the baton off to Harris and people who look like Harris and people who have similar outlooks as Harris and have her kind of life experience.
Which means whether or not Joe Biden wins in 2020, Kamala Harris will likely look ahead to 2024. From Wilmington, Delaware, Patsy Widakuswara, VOA News.
In our entertainment segment, COVID-19 has the legendary Malian singer and women's rights activist Oumou Sangare on lockdown in the Washington, D.C. area. The Grammy Award winner and featured artist on Beyoncé's visual album Black is King recently spoke with Music Time in Africa host Heather Maxwell. She reveals her secret for longevity in the world of music business and how French pop star Aya Nakamura symbolizes Oumou's cumulative impact on African women's empowerment since the late 1980s.
Hello, everybody. I have the great pleasure to introduce you to Oumou Sangare. Hello, Oumou. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you, Anna.
So what are you doing in the United States?
I had just come for holiday 2 weeks. Unfortunately, Corona locked me in here.
We have known each other now for a long time. Well, I've known you more than you have known me, but it has been decades where you have released just amazing albums. I think maybe 8 by now. You just released one in 2020, and you started back in the late 80s. So what is the key to staying on top for all of these years?
I work a lot, and I am so in love with my traditional instrument from Wasulu. It's something that the rest of the world has to see. We have things that we must show others.
It makes me think of that your 2020 album, Acoustic. I really loved that song, Samani.
Yes.
Could you explain what it is? What are you singing about?
Samani, I wrote it, it's been more than 15 years ago. It's a song that speaks about death.
de la mort. Vous savez, la mort.
You know, death doesn't pardon anyone. I sang it because I had lost my first arranger. It was very painful for me.
Who was that?
Amadou Bagindo. He's the one who arranged my first album, Andia, Jarabi Nene, and all of those. It was him. The album came out, and not even 3 months later, he died. So it was then I had the real shock of death, and it pushed me to write a song about death. And since then, when one hears Samani in no matter what radio in Mali, everyone, everywhere in Africa or on TV, that signals that someone has died.
I know you are a big advocate for women. You always have been. From when you first came out with Bifuru and talked about marriage and frankly about problems and issues with women, how have things changed or developed since then, almost 30 years ago?
It helped women a lot, and it continues to help them because I invited them, excited them to believe in themselves. Because many young girls, many women say, I really want to be like Oumou Sangare.
Me too.
Yeah.
Moi aussi.
Même la chanteuse.
Even the singer, there's a Malian singer who was raised in France, Ayana Kumura.
Yes.
Today, I was so surprised to discover that all of her inspiration comes from me, even to the point that she sang, I am like Oumou Sangare. So while making the clip, they gave me the crown, and I gave it to her saying, here, take the queen's crown. You are the queen now. Go on, like Oumou Sangare.
What plans do you have in the future?
I am stuck here 1 month, 2 months. After 3 months, I said, but Oumou Sangare, you can't stay here 3 months doing nothing. This is not me. I went in the studio. It's the demo. I start to create songs here. Already the new album. The whole demo is already.
Yes. Do you have the title?
I'm withholding that for a surprise.
Okay.
It's crazy when I call my family. I say, but you know what? I'm stuck here. It's true. But I transform my stress into work. So I'm not stressed. I'm in the studio. I'm working. They say, Oumou, you are strong.
Like I said, always on top.
Always, I try.
Merci, Oumou Sangare. C'était vraiment un grand plaisir de vous voir.
Anna.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Heather, for that enlightening interview. And that's our show for today. Be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. From all of us here in Washington, have a great weekend.